Good afternoon. I want to thank you all for joining us today for the first of our year-end training webinars. My name is Greg Dario, and I'm going to be joined today by John Brennan. We both work with the Ativo Group. Some of you may know us already, but for those of you who don't, just a brief intro. We are an exact Macola reseller based in Orange County, California. We have technical resources peppered throughout the country, and we have been in the Macola space for over 25 years. The purpose of today's webinar is to discuss how to properly perform a physical inventory count in exact Macola, both progression, ES, and even EM10. John will be walking me through the presentation today, and he really is a knowledge leader on the subject. Before joining us at Ativo, John spent 10 years working at Exact in a number of different support roles. But before we jump into the presentation, I do want to cover a few logistical items. We do have quite a large group on today's webinar, so I'm going to keep everyone's phones on mute during the presentation. If you do have a question during the webinar, feel free to use the chat feature on the webinar dashboard. I will be monitoring that throughout. Once the presentation is finished, I will unmute everyone's phone so we can have a more open Q&A. I do ask, though, that if you don't have any questions, you self-mute your phone so we don't get overwhelmed by background noise. The presentation should last around 45 minutes this morning, and we are recording the presentation. That recording should be available by the end of the day tomorrow, Monday at the latest, as well as the slide deck will be made available to you as well if you should want that. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda. I'm going to go ahead and first give you just a more extensive introduction to the Ativo Group, and then we're going to move into the meat of the presentation. We're going to go over some of the general concepts behind a physical inventory count, what you need to do to properly prepare before you really get into the nitty-gritty, some of the controls required. We'll cover count execution, work in process, and then we're going to also go over a very important part, the reconciliation part of doing a physical inventory count, as well as finalizing the inventory. That should take us about 45 minutes, which will then bring us into our Q&A portion. But again, before we get into the meat and potatoes, let's go ahead and take just a quick look at who the Ativo Group is. John, there we go. So who we are, you can see there's a picture of some of our shining faces there. We have been around since 1992, so as you can see, we are now in our third decade of being a Macola reseller. We are based in Orange County, California. Our offices are actually in Santa Ana. I have a beautiful view of the 55 and 405 interchange from where I'm perched this morning. We also have an office in Houston, Texas, and like I mentioned before, we have technical resources that are peppered throughout the country. And collectively, we have over 150 years working with Macola applications. Our mission statement is we like to bring new life and transform businesses through automated processes and streamlined and profitable operations. As you can see at the bottom of every slide, you're going to see our website, phone number, and contact information. In addition to Macola software support, we do have some managed services like cloud hosting and credit card integrations. We won't get into any of that today, but if you have questions about any of that stuff, please feel free to give us a call, shoot us an email. With that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and let John take over and begin the presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg. My name is John Brennan, and as he had mentioned, I've been with Macola and Exact for over 10 years, but before that, I actually was as an internal auditor for Kraft Foods and held some other positions. And as an internal auditor, I've probably seen more physical inventories than Carter has little pills. So what I bring to this, hopefully, is a perspective outside of what we might see as far as the software is concerned, and hopefully I can address any issues that you might have regarding how the software works, but more importantly, the principles that go behind the concept of an inventory count. We want to get into why perform a physical inventory, and basically an inventory is your largest single asset. Now, albeit there may be machinery and equipment in there that actually is a pretty fair chunk of change, but the bottom line is that this is how you make your money. Your inventory, whether it be for production or for resale, is usually the largest asset that you have, and it's also the most frequently mismanaged asset. I'm not saying that people mismanage their assets intentionally, but if you've been around inventory at all, if you've been around any manufacturing or distribution site, it's not hard to lose things, it's not hard to misplace things, and it's not hard to miscount things. It does have the largest potential for error and financial impact if you have inventory on hand, but you don't show it on hand in your inventory. You can't ship it to a customer, and you're losing that sale, not only the sale, but also the margin that goes along with it. So there is a large potential for error and financial impact, and I think we all recognize that, and I think that's why we have a number of folks on today's presentation. The other reason is that it's GAAP recommended. So for generally accepted accounting principles, you really want to know, and I think the government wants to know from you as well. A couple of ways to look at an inventory. There's a cycle count and a physical count type of inventory, and they're both different, and they both accomplish different tasks. The physical inventory is a periodic inventory of all items, such as annually. I've actually been involved with organizations that have to do a physical inventory monthly, excuse me, quarterly, semi-annually, and even annually. And basically that's because they have no idea what they have in inventory. They actually have to go out and count it because they don't keep very good track of it. What we want to be able to do, though, is we actually want to be able to do cycle counting. And cycle counting is a process of counting just a little bit of your inventory, a small portion. In here it says on a daily basis, but it doesn't even need to be a daily basis. It needs to be a periodic basis. For instance, if there's not a lot of inventory movement and you have 3 or 4 or 5 different concepts as to what you want to count, you can do that on a periodic basis. Maybe you could do once a week or maybe once a month. You get to decide when you do your cycle counting. The principal purpose of a cycle count is to make sure that your inventory is accurate and you don't have to do as many total physical counts. Your goal is to replace the physical inventory with cycle counting and thus reducing your costs. And you'll see how it reduces your cost when we get into a little bit further into the presentation. So the cycle count actually helps you tune up your inventory. The physical count really is one of those things where you need to do it on an annual basis. So the difference between cycle counting and a physical inventory, the cycle count really is an efficient use of few experienced people continuously throughout the year on a periodic basis. And who might these people be? Well, they might be department heads. They might be tow motor drivers who are familiar with the inventory, familiar with the location, and are able to find the items that we're looking to count relatively simply, not miss anything, not miss the item numbers, or incorrectly count things. On the other hand, if you're talking about a periodic or physical inventory, you're really talking about pulling a group of people together for a short period of time to count an awful lot of stuff that don't, generally speaking, have a lot of experience in that concept. I will tell you this, one of the things that we used to do in a folding carton industry was we would do a semi-annual physical count, and we would use people from the production line. We'd even have people from accounting come down and work on the inventory, whether it be creating tags or recording inventory, and it was pretty much all done on a spreadsheet. I don't know if many of you out there have done physical inventories on a spreadsheet. It's not necessarily that easy. So the key here is that we have a few experienced people who are doing the count and being able to get it correct and accurate, and then we have for the physical inventory a lot of people who probably shouldn't even be down there working on a physical count. Plus you're taking away from what they normally do. So the results of that, in fact, it is timely detection and correction of causes and errors for those people who know where the items are or who are more experienced in the inventory process. They're able to find out where something is broken, where something is missing, where they have too many, and they're able to fix that right away. There are a few mistakes in the item identification, being familiar with the items that you're working with. It could be a department, it could be the individual responsible for packaging, supplies, etc. Those are the people who know what they've got, know where it is, and if something is missing, if something doesn't show up or does show up that shouldn't be there, they're the ones who will be able to identify it relatively quickly. There's also a minimal loss of production time. Cycle count does not necessarily require that you stop production, when on the other hand, plant and warehouse shutdown for an inventory is not uncommon. It really needs to be done, and we'll see why in just a little bit. Finally, there's a systematic improvement of record accuracy. The more you do the cycle counting, and the more you cycle count, and the more you arrange and organize your inventory, the less likely there is that you're going to have a problem as far as the accuracy of your records are concerned. When you're doing a periodic physical inventory, whether it be quarterly or semi-annually or annually, you're going to wind up not improving the record accuracy. You're just going to wind up getting upset that it isn't accurate. So let's talk just a little bit about an inventory freeze in Macola. And for those of you some of you might be a little bit confused about the concept of a freeze in inventory in Macola because, well, we have two of them. There are actually two inventory freeze processes. The first one is a physical or cycle count freeze process. And the first thing we see here is a tag freeze date. And the tag freeze date simply says, as of this date, this is what my inventory is. Now let's assume for a moment that we have processed a purchase order or we process receipts or sales orders, but we haven't posted it to the system yet. It's on the floor, it's there, or we've shipped it out, it's not there, but the system doesn't know about that yet. So if we're freezing it on 12/4, when we process the transaction and say, well, it should have been done on 12/1, that updates our frozen quantity. So when we go out and make that count, we're actually going to count the stuff that is there, even though it may not have been there when we first started the process. And the other time is if we already shipped it out, it's not there, and we're not going to wind up with a shortage. The end of month freeze, on the other hand, that's the freeze inventory process to freeze the cost and quantity on hand values as of a specific date, usually at the end of a period. Now, freezing that inventory allows your company to continue doing business while you're still being able to look back and analyze inventory levels and the values as of the freeze date. The freeze date here is for orders and cost on hand, quantity and cost on hand. The freeze inventory for the frozen quantities in the physical count and cycle count simply allows you to make sure that the quantity you're matching against is the actual quantity that you have on the floor. So let's talk just a little bit about obsolete inventory. The obsolete inventory, and whenever we're doing a physical count, we want to make sure that we want to make sure that we count everything. If it's still on site, it still needs to be counted. Even if it's obsolete, even if it's damaged, everything that's on site needs to be counted in a physical inventory. You should reserve a sufficient amount for the write-off. And finally, you should also flag the obsolete item in the master file. Now, you can still sell an obsolete item, and you can still purchase an obsolete item. As in order entry, there's an option for you to prevent or warn if an item is obsolete. So from your item master file, you're going to make this an obsolete item. In your order entry setup, you're going to be able to say, I want to be able to use this in a sale. I want to be able to warn you that it is, or I want to be able to prevent you from using it. Next, we start getting into the part that most people maybe overlook, and that's housekeeping. When we talk about housekeeping, we're really talking about the state of your organization, the state of your warehouse or your location that makes it easier for you to count. It's critical when we're doing a physical inventory, and it's still pretty necessary when you're doing a cycle count, but the primary focus here needs to be on organizing your warehouse, organizing your location to make that count simpler. As we had mentioned earlier on, we don't always have the people who know inventory, know the items, know the location, and know the labeling doing the physical count. So we actually need to organize it so these folks can actually participate, not only participate, but also make accurate counts and provide that information to those individuals who are summarizing the counts. Next thing we want to do is we want to identify and label items. So we want to make sure that regardless of who's doing the counting, everybody knows what that item is. We're able to identify what it is, whether it be a box, a roll, a bin, a carboy, a gaylord, whatever it is. We want to be able to label that item so when we go to count it, we're actually able to see what that item is and actually able to identify the quantity of that item. The other thing we want to do is we might want to separate supplies. Supplies are those items that you're going to use to run your organization. They could be supplies for MRO supplies, etc. If that's not your line of business, it is important, but it's not nearly as important as the revenue-generating inventory that we're actually going out to count. So you might want to separate those supplies and make them a little bit separate so that they can be counted individually and separately. Now, where feasible, we want to group like items together. And when I say that, I think everybody out there gets the fact that if I have all my packaging supplies in one place, it'll be easier for those individuals who are in the process, who are in the packaging end of the business, to be able to take a look and be able to make those counts without missing anything. Same thing for finished goods. It might be for if we're counting resin or we're counting gaylords and silos. Put all that information together so that when that's counted, the people who are counting that information have a pretty specific idea as to what it is. All this has to do with the concept of organizing your count. Organizing your count can take probably up to a week. I've actually seen tow motor operators working for 3 days to make sure that all the items that they have are lined up and make the count process simple. So let's talk about preparation for pre-counts. One of the things that I've found, and you may have found that as well, is that when it comes time to count the contents, you might want to count the contents of a half-full carton, and then you want to tape the carton. Why do we want to do that? Well, I have, for instance, a pallet of 24 items and a case of items that are on top of that is not full. You want to make sure you count that, but you want to tape it shut so that nobody takes anything out or puts anything in. Same thing for a partial pallet. So if, in fact, you have contents that are not a complete case, it would not be counted as one unit, you need to be able to make sure that you've got those contents in a box, sealed and labeled. And on the label, you want to make sure that you identify the item number, the description, the quantity, the unit of measure, and the date counted. Now, this may be for items that you have that are normally palletized and you're breaking the case down, but it also might be for supplies such as nuts and bolts and things that pretty much are supplied, maybe bulk issue items in the manufacturing process. I want to be able to count those. I also want to be able to know how many there are, but I don't want to have to go through the process of counting them as I'm going through the warehouse. This is how we're going to make the process a lot simpler. This is how we're going to speed the process and refine the process so that it takes less time to count and also provides greater accuracy. So pre-counts are pretty important. We used to do pre-counts for folding cartons. We used to do them for printed and cut sheets. And we would go actually down and do the pre-count so that when people came around, and again, we were talking about using people who were not necessarily warehouse and tow motor operators. They were able to count the information and count the items and process them so to increase the accuracy of a physical count. Those aren't the people you'd be using in a cycle count. As far as other tasks are concerned, item identification. All items need to be clearly labeled with the Macola item number. Now, why would we want to do that? Isn't the vendor's number sufficient? Well, not really, because when it comes time to fill out the count ticket, we need to make sure that we have the Macola item number because that's how it's going to be entered. We'll have the tag number, then we'll have the quantity. So the item identification is extremely important when we're preparing for the physical count. The whole idea is that we want to make this as simple and as quick and painless as possible. Next, we have negative on-hand inventory. This during a physical inventory always bothered me because it's not possible to have a negative inventory. It can't be possible. It's either there, it either is, or it ain't. Before you take a physical inventory, you need to make sure that you set that right. Most likely have missing transactions. Some instances might occur where I've actually gone out and shipped something before I received it. Well, it didn't come in as far as purchasing is concerned because it took it right off the dock and put it on a truck and sent it out. Well, if I don't have the purchase in there and I process the order and it's not there to count, I have a negative inventory. No, you don't. The process, if it's complete, for all the transactions that need to be processed, will show that there are no negative inventory. By the way, the other thing about having a negative inventory, that doesn't mean that you're like, for instance, if you have a negative inventory of 10, that doesn't mean you're off by 10. It could mean that you're off by an entire load. So the error is not just the 10 and a 0. The error is the quantity that you should have on hand. The thing is, you want to plan to fix these at least a week in advance, and you say at least a week in advance, but the bottom line is it could happen the day before you take your physical inventory. Get rid of all your negative on-hand inventory. I don't say get rid of it by getting it out of the system. You need to make sure that all the transactions are processed and posted so that your inventory is accurate at the freeze date. So next we have our preparation and planning meeting, and the planning meeting is more important for a physical count than it is for a cycle count. And the reason is because there's more effort, more people need that require training and require orientation and more planning in order to do this as efficiently as possible. First thing you want to do is you want to publish an inventory schedule. Now, we talked a little bit about how we needed to organize, we needed to plan, we needed to get rid of negative inventory. That needs to be part of the plan itself. We need to know that if we're coming in on Saturday morning, we're shutting down the plant at 7 o'clock in the morning if it's a 3-shift plant, and we're starting the count at 7 o'clock in the morning because we want to make this as efficient and timely as possible. So you publish a schedule as to who needs to do what and when it needs to be completed, and we really need to stick to that schedule. Next, we want to review the cutoff plan. Now, what is the cutoff plan? Well, we just mentioned a couple of items. We're talking in terms of processing all of our orders. We're talking about processing all of our purchase orders and receipts. We want to make sure that all of that's done, and we'll cover that in the next slide. Next, we want to use basic user training for those individuals. And again, the basic user training, if we're doing a cycle count, probably requires a little bit less effort, only because these are the individuals who work with the inventory items on a daily basis. We've found that foremen or team leads or tow motor operators who continuously work with the inventory items probably need less training than the folks who actually work on the line, and probably a lot less training than those folks who work in accounting. I have nothing against accountants. However, as a former accountant, walking into a 30-degree below quick freeze cooler for seal test is not my cup of tea. Other people can probably do that very easily. An accountant, not so much. Next thing you need to do is assign responsibilities, and there are different components and different pieces and parts of what you need to do to go through a physical inventory. And again, the responsibilities for a cycle count are probably limited. You're going to need the individual who does the count, and then you're going to need the individual who actually enters the count into the system. My suggestion would be that they be 2 different people, but that's up to you. When it comes to other responsibilities, such as if you have the accountants coming down and they're posting the count tags, they're issuing and controlling the count tags, you may have some folks out there who are recounting items that have been counted before. So those responsibilities need to be defined, well defined, so that when something needs to be done, you're not looking for someone to do it. Everybody knows what their job is and their responsibility is. And the last item is treat this like a project, not a routine. This is a physical count is a project. It is a project that is extremely important to your organization because we said earlier, this may be the largest asset that your organization has as far as generating revenue is concerned. All right, let's take a little bit look about process control. And we said process control, we really talked a little bit about the cutoffs. Now, first of all, the number one is PO receipts. We want to make sure that we complete the purchase order receipts and segregate the inventory received from not received, marked do not inventory. Probably, if any of you go shopping at a big box store and you see all they're pallet racks, but people would call them bins, you can actually look up and see that they've just completed an inventory because they have little pieces of tape or big signs on some of the pallets in the racks that do not inventory. That simply means when I'm going through the count process, and this is a training piece, this is a training concept as well, do not count this. It may be there, don't count it, and there's a good reason not to count it. Next we have is production. We want to complete all production material issues and completions and segregate completed assemblies from other work in process. And again, this is more important when we're talking about a physical inventory as opposed to a cycle count. We're going to go through in a minute just talking about the ways of setting up a cycle count, but the physical inventory, some people call it a wall-to-wall inventory or as encountered inventory. I want to make sure that everything in that plant, everything in that warehouse, everything in that location is counted and input. And finally, we have shipments. Process all shipped orders of a cutoff date and post invoices. You want to make sure that you do that, but I do have to tell you, one of the things that we used to do is we used to have rubber stamps made. Last purchase order or last receipt, last order. And we would stamp that last order and we would make sure that we knew that that was the last order that was processed. It requires everybody to be participating in the physical count. Accounting has to make sure that they've done their processing. Shipping and receiving needs to make sure that they have received everything and processed it, and they've also shipped everything and processed it. One of the reasons they do that is for a physical count is because I'm shutting my plant down for a period of time. I need to make that as short a period of time as possible, absolutely as short as possible, because I'm losing money for every minute that I'm not running. So let's talk a little bit about process control. So when we talk about process control, we're really talking about a project again. When we talk about process control, let's talk a little bit about tag control. First of all, we want to designate areas for counting. Think about this just a little bit. You have individuals who would be comfortable in an area, for instance, packaging supplies. It might be shrink, the place where you keep all your resin, or where you keep all of your the items that you store as liquids. Maybe you have some outside storage tanks. So you want to identify tag numbers for each area. When I'm doing a physical count, I want to make sure that I have tags assigned for each of those areas. And how I assign those tags really is kind of important. I want to make sure that the individual who has those tag numbers knows where they're going and knows when they come back. Next, we want to issue a range of extra tags per area. Why would we want to do that? If I'm printing out tags for all the items I'm supposed to have, why would I need extra tags? Well, you need extra tags because you don't always know exactly. That's what you do in a physical inventory. I need to verify that all of my inventory is being counted. Okay? So we want to create tags for all items with extras in case the other items are found during the count. And I've done that, and you've probably done that as well. Okay? Put someone in charge of each area. Put someone in charge of each area to go and review the count that the counters have taken, but also make sure that they're the ones who can control the count sheets and make sure they get back to the individuals who are going to add the information into the inventory. Next, tag control sheet. Tags issued to who and what areas and status. This you're going to have to maintain manually. You need to know who you issued those tags to, whether it be the supervisor or the one who's in charge of that area, and what area that was for, and the status of those tags. The key here is that you don't want an entire area missed because somebody left the tag count or somebody left the counted tags out on somebody else's desk. You need to make sure there's an individual who's responsible for making sure that all of the tags come back. And finally, you want to run your reports after the tag has been input. You want to see your missing tags report, and you also want to see your uncounted inventory report. This helps you keep track of anything that you might have missed. If I said there's some inventory out there, but it never got counted, that's a warning sign. That means I need to go out and either find that, maybe someplace where it wasn't supposed to be, or I need to find out what transactions weren't processed that said I had that, but I really didn't. All right, now let's get to the execution, the physical count batch. And we're going to do this pretty much. Most of the screenshots you're going to see will be for ES. However, you can see as far as the physical count batch is concerned, we're showing the progression as well. The functionality is almost identical. It's pretty darn close. And a couple of things we want to remember about our physical count batch when we create that batch. First of all, you create a batch ID. I created a batch ID simply using the year, the month, and the day for that particular count. You can create any type of account you want. If you're doing a cycle count, and we'll see that in just a second, you can name it anything you want by day, could be by area, could be how you're counting how you're doing your cycle count. Next, we want to make sure that we have the location. We want to make sure that we have the location that we're counting. A couple of things I want to point out about the location. The location does not necessarily need to be a single warehouse. A location can be a warehouse in one building, could be a location in the building, but you can only count one location per batch. You can't have all. You need to identify the location because that's how we store our inventory, by location. So you need to put the location that you're going to be counting in the location file. Next we have our starting tag number. Here's the deal: accept the starting tag default, unless you have a good reason not to, and we'll talk about that possibly in just a little bit. Next, you want to make sure that you have some extra tags. Plan a lot of extra tags. Plan 10% more extra tags. And the reason I say that is because if you don't have anything to count, you simply count the extra tags, and there's nothing in them, there's nothing that you have to add, so you don't lose anything. But if you have a problem and you find a lot of inventory that you didn't expect to find, you need to have those counts so you can input those into the system. Next we have is the form number, and the form number allows us to select the type of form that we want to use, continuous, double blind, etc. So we have those options as far as the form is concerned. One of the things I want to point out about the form, and I've actually had people mention this to me, they go out and have some pre-printed tags, pre-printed NCR tags that they use. And those pre-printed NCR tags actually have their own numbers on them, and we might want to be able to use that. There's a way, and probably most of you have found it already, that you can actually use the extra tags with those new tag numbers that will match up with the pre-printed count tags that you're going to be using. Next we have is our sort code, exclude zero quantities, exclude negative inventory, etc. Here's the big one. You want to make sure that you use your frozen quantities in your calculations. In this particular instance, we used December 4th, and December 4th was our cutoff date. Had we found that we had found a purchase order or a receiving ticket that we received on the 3rd, but it wasn't processed, if we process it on the 3rd as that document date, it will adjust our frozen quantity to include that. That way we won't see an overage. We won't say we should have had 1,000, we now have 1,050. It will show the 1,050, and that'll be the quantity that we'll be matching when we do our physical inventory. Execution cycle count batch. Now this looks a little bit more complicated. So a couple of things I want to point out here. Obviously the batch ID is exactly the same concept. You want to be able to create a batch ID that you can identify, and you can create multiple batch IDs at multiple batches at one time. The other thing is that let's go down through each of the individual selections that we can use, because the cycle count obviously is different than a physical count. Physical count is wall to wall. Everything you see is everything you get. Let's talk a little bit differently about how we're going to be doing a cycle count. First of all, if we select starting and ending item, using the item selection, it's useful for intelligent part numbers. When I say intelligent part numbers, if your part numbers are ordered like I have tube steel, TS, and then I have a number after that, I could literally select all of the TS stuff and starting item number TS1 to TS 3000. And I would simply pull those items. So if you're using intelligent part numbers, you can actually use the starting item number and ending item number. Anytime you use starting of anything and ending of anything, you want to make sure that what you're pulling is based on, is not a random selection. Next we have bins. We want to do a starting bin or an ending bin. Now, bins are useful for items that are stored in specific sublocations. Not warehouse, not locations, but sublocations. Most organizations, or a lot of organizations, will label their bins either alpha or numerically or alphanumerically, so that I can actually go from bin to bin to bin to bin and take my physical count specifically in even in a picking sequence environment. Next we have the category. This is useful for specific product categories or sales categories, such as accessories, packaging supplies, could be a type of inventory, a type of finished good that you're looking for. I only want to look at this category of item as opposed to randomly selecting or using an ABC analysis. So categories are more helpful if the product categories, again, are intelligent-based. The numberings for your product categories are intelligence-based. Next we have is our vendor. Why would we want to select a vendor? Well, we want to select a vendor because maybe we don't, I can't say this. It's not that we wouldn't trust our vendors. Of course we trust our vendors. But we may have a problem with the vendor. We may have a problem with inspection for an vendor. We want to be able to find the quantity of material that we have from that vendor. Maybe we require specific purchases from that vendor. Maybe we don't require specific purchases from that vendor. Primary vendor, exclusive vendor, etc. Next we have is our ABC code, and that's predetermined based upon financial risk or value per item. Now this is really a frequency setting. This is where we're able to identify if I have an A-type item, which means I'm accounting for 80% of my inventory with 20% of the count, 80% of the value with 20% of the count. That's an A-type item, and I might want to count my A-type items daily. Maybe I want to count my B-type items weekly, and maybe I want to count my C-type items monthly. What that does is every time I create a cycle count, it finds out when the last count was, is one due, and then it will print out the count sheet for just the items that are relevant as far as that ABC code transaction is concerned. Next we have the cycle count code, and this cycle count code, this is entered. This is one that you're going to create. This is the cycle count that you're going to create, and it's against the item master, and it's user defined. So in the item master, if you have a group of items again that may not fit into your starting item number and ending item number, but you want them grouped together when it comes time to count, you can use a cycle count code, and that cycle count code is entered in your item master file. Finally, we have UOM. And again, if I'm going into too much detail, the idea here is that you don't have to just select the ABC code. Most people think they want to do an ABC code, but I can tell you, if in fact I'm running an injection molding plant, I want to be able to find out in my silos. I want to be able to find out on a monthly basis how much inventory is in there. So what would I do? I'd say unit of measure pounds, unit of measure gallons. So I would be able to say anything I measure in pounds or anything I measure in gallons, I have in a specific part of the warehouse, I want to go out and count all that stuff, all of my liquid material. Maybe I have propane. I want to go out and count all of the cubic feet of propane, or identify all the cubic feet of propane. So unit of measure allows us to break down the cycle count in a fashion that allows us to count like items. Okay? All right. Execution, print the tags. Print to pre-printed or blank paper forms. You print to blank paper forms, and if you've ever done this, you've probably seen where that's not exactly what I would want to do. It's a lot easier when we're doing a cycle count because the cycle count prints out a worksheet, and the worksheet actually allows you to see all the information pertinent for that item, and allows you to go out and make those counts based upon the selections, well, that we just saw. So when it comes time to printing out count tags, you can do a pre-printed or blank paper forms. And again, this is probably the best way to do that. The other way, and I did mention that a little bit earlier, is the problem might be I have pre-printed some NCR tags with pre-printed numbers on them, and I'm going to control it like that. I'm not suggesting that that's the best way, but it actually can be done. And it's done by using extra tags. Next, we want to enter the count tags. Once we've made the physical count, once we've gone out and counted, it's now time to go in and enter the count tags as they're completed. Probably you don't want to wait until the end. Probably you don't want to wait until the end of the process. You probably want to do that as they're coming in. One of the things that we always did, when it would take us probably about 8 hours. It would take us about 4 hours to count, and another 2 hours after that to get all the tags entered. And then what we need to do is once you're finished with that, you actually need to go out and recount those items which show a significant variance, and we'll see that in a minute. So we want to use the count extra tags function once all tags are entered and accounted for. So when we talked about the control sheet as far as the areas, the person responsible for the area, who, where, and when. So once we've made sure that all of our tags have been returned, we can now go and count the extra tags because we're not using them. Plus, you can the other thing is you can also automate the process by performing your physical count with scanners. I've actually seen people go out and use scanners to do their physical count. I can't say that I've ever done it that way myself, and for those of you who have, you can comment whether or not it's a good idea or it's easier or less difficult to do using your scanners and guns. Did we count everything? Now that we've taken care of the count process itself, let's take a look at the missing tag report. So after you've entered all of your tags, you can print a missing tag report. And what that does, it lists and tag number order all the items that you selected for the inventory count that you do not have tag counts entered for them. You want to use that to help identify items that you want to identify items that you assign tags to actually had tag data entered. You can print the list for all batch IDs or for a range of batch IDs, etc. So if I said there was something out there and I didn't put anything in there, that's the missing tag report. Next we have is our uncounted inventory report. Now this report lists in item number order, so the items that you've got, all the items that you selected for the inventory count that you do not have a tag count for. I didn't enter a tag count for this item. I selected it, and I'm supposed to have it out there. What does that mean? Well, first of all, it means I need to go out and find it. And then I need to, if I can't find it, I need to find out why. I said that I had 35 of these out here. I don't have any of them. I didn't count any of them. Is it possible I missed it? Is it possible there was an error in some of the transactions, etc.? So I need, this is how we find out when we get to our variance report. This is how we find out that we need to either go out and recount something, etc. So I guess the point here is that using these reports make it a whole lot simple than simply going to the variance analysis. What about WIP? I'm not going to get into a whole lot about WIP because when I first came to Exact, my concept of WIP was actually an assembly, and each assembly had its own inventory item. So I was actually able to go out and count. I was actually able to go out and count cut sheets, printed sheets, die cut sheets, strip sheets, glued, cartons, finished goods, etc. I was able to actually go out and count those because each of those was a subassembly that we inventoried. WIP doesn't actually necessarily work like that. However, you can use your production transaction history report, including your component usage, to validate WIP, okay? It's not going to give you the quantity. It's simply going to say, I have this many dollars in WIP. I can actually go out and take a look at the components and come close to the quantity that I should have. If it's sitting on the floor, you can count what's sitting on the floor and figure out what it should cost and what the WIP value should be. And if it's close, you have to buy that. You have to buy into that. Next we have is our shop floor. You want to use a work in process summary by job report to verify the WIP value. Notice we're verifying the value. It's a little bit harder of a push, but the fact is I can count the stuff if in fact we consider it WIP, an inventoriable WIP item, but we don't count it as an inventory item. We can find that, count it, and then explode it to find out if in fact what we have in the WIP account, financial WIP account, matches pretty close to what we say we had on the floor. Again, this was the first time I'd ever seen that done, is because every time I'd ever had WIP was actually a subassembly that we inventoried. This is our reconciliation. This is our variance by item report, the starting point that we want to take a look at as far as our reconciliation is concerned. We want to use a filter to focus the effort. We might want a starting batch ID and ending batch ID. The one thing about the variance report is it's going to tell us at a glance where we might have made a mistake, where we might have had some issues that are broken, where we might need to send somebody back out for another count. And we'll see in just a second what that report actually looks like. You got your starting batch ID and your starting item number, variance or quantity or cost. I want to look at cost. I don't care if I lost 1,000 Phillips head screws, if the whole value of that's only $2.75. I don't care. Well, I can't say I don't care. I care less than an item where I've misplaced 2 of them for $10,000. So I want to take a look at the total cost of the variance by total cost. And then I want to take greater or less than frozen by 100 or greater or less than frozen by a percentage. I can define what that is, and that's the filtering process that we have as far as our variance by item report. Let's just take a real quick look at what that report looks like. Again, this is one of those COBOL reports that sometimes it makes it real tough to find things. Okay, let's take a look at the report itself. And what we did here, when we did this physical count, when we did a cycle count rather, we decided we were going to select a product category of accessories from a demo database. So you'll notice we have over here frozen quantity, frozen cost, count quantity, and actual cost. You'll notice that I'm finding the cost variance, and the cost variance says, yeah, I kind of lost 40 bucks there. Oops, excuse me. I lost 40 bucks there. Now that we find out where the problem is with these items, now we can go and find out whether or not tag number 815 was actually counted correctly. So we can actually go out there and determine whether it was counted correctly. If it was, and we have not yet posted the transaction, the count, we can actually go out and change that tag to the correct amount. So the bottom line here is I want my variance by item report. I want this to be the place where I can find out what's broken and go out and fix it. This is where I do my second count or maybe even my third count to validate that I need to have, in the past, for all the inventories that I've ever done, most of the inventories I've ever done, you had to have 3 counts. 2 of them had to agree. One of them showed no variance. That was fine. If another one showed a variance and you went out and counted it and there were 2 different counts, you needed to go out and have somebody count it again to make sure we had 2 counts to tie down. Reconciliation, inventory history, item transaction history report. What happened? Shall we accept the variance? So I want to run my transaction history report, not for everything, but for those specific items to see if it's broken someplace, if there was an order that was incorrect, if we did something that we shouldn't have done. We will have our physical count, and then we'll show a P, then we'll show a Q where we made the quantity adjustment. This is where we start to find out what the problem was. Do we want to accept the variance, or do I find something in transaction history report that says this got broken here, I need to take a look, I need to get it fixed. Reconciliation, correcting transactions. Transaction corrections can be made to eliminate variances. The whole idea is that transaction needs to be posted on or before the freeze date. We talked about that a little bit earlier on. If I have a purchase order or if I have a sales order that actually occurred and was not posted prior to the freeze date, it needs to be done. It'll update the frozen quantity used in calculating the variance. So for instance, if the first item that we saw up here, hold on. If the first item we saw up here, we had a frozen quantity of 1,010, but the count quantity was only 1,000, maybe there was a purchase order that came in for 10 of those, but it wasn't posted. So if we go and post a transaction prior to 12/4, it'll adjust the frozen quantity, or I'm sorry, we shipped out 10. It'll post the frozen quantity, adjust that to the 1,000 because the 1,000 count quantity is correct. So I'm looking at a frozen quantity of 1,010. I actually shipped 10 on an order, but I didn't post the order. If I post it prior to the 12/4 date, the frozen quantity will equal the count quantity, and there won't be a variance. All right. Where are we? Here we go. Finalizing the physical count, and please be very careful. Any report that you want to generate based upon the count that you've taken and the ability to modify and change that count for accuracy, we want to use the post count tags process and first print. I should have highlighted and underlined that. First print the pre-post register. You want to review to understand and approve financial impact. Could be some big bucks. Post the tags by running the process with with the preprint unselected. So there's 2 phases to that. The first place is run it with a preprint post register, then you run it with that turned off. Warning. Once you've posted it, you don't get to do the variances anymore. You're done. Now, we actually had a client who said, I accidentally posted my count. Can I get back all the variance information? The answer is no. Can I get tag accuracy? No. Warning, it's like Will Robinson. Danger, danger. Make sure that you have all the reports and you finalized your count before you post the count. I've gone over a little bit, about 5 minutes over, but hopefully we covered the things that make sense as far as the physical inventory is concerned. We'd like to help more. Let us know what else you would like to see presented. And also, you can help us with referrals to others that can use help with their systems. Does anybody out there have any questions?
John, we did have a couple questions coming over chat. I would also like, John, just to advance to the last slide real quick so we can get our contact information up there for everybody.
There we go.
So we had a couple questions that came in over chat. I'm going to cover those, then I'm going to go ahead and open the phone lines if there are any questions that anyone has that they want to shout out. We're going to start with a question, is there a way to reset count tag numbers? Our tag numbers are getting a little bit high.
Well, once you purge the file, you can actually go ahead and set them again if you choose to do that. When you say they're a little bit high, I believe that you can purge them and start again. I also believe that when it comes time to set those, you can actually set. I know you can reset them in progression. I'd actually have to go in and take a look and see where you do that. But you are right; you do want to be able to reset those. Let me get if you can send either me at john@ativoconsulting.com or Greg your email address. We'll get back to you with that. I believe you can reset them, but I can't tell you right now where that is. Okay, Greg.
And Chris, I know that was your question, so we'll find out the answer for you, and we'll get that squared away. Another question that came in. I know we were talking a lot about ES and progression. Are there any great differences between doing a physical inventory count in EM10 when compared to ES?
At the present time, I haven't seen anything. We're going to wind up still using the core ERP product. The difference in EM10 actually winds up being when we're using objects. And the last time I looked at EM10, I looked at the core ERP part, and I didn't see where they were using objects to a physical inventory. Now, that being said, if you're using workspaces, you might want to be able to create a workspace for physical inventory and put all of the information necessary to account for that inventory in that workspace for the individual who's going to be doing the count. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. First of all, you can actually you will be using if you're using AM10, probably wind up using core ERP. The other part of it is going to be you can also create workspaces that will allow you to accumulate all of that information in a workspace for inventory, maybe even for warehouse. You get to define what that is.
Thanks, John. And then Jeff just sent in a question. He wants to know if you can elaborate a little further on conducting a physical inventory count using scanners.
I'm afraid I can say what I've done. Probably the best thing is that piece would wind up probably being a good question to get to the WISES folks. One of the things that we found was when you're doing a count using scanners, you need to make sure that you're scanning the correct items. One of the things I found is that it wouldn't have worked well where I was because there was the ability to get to those particular items and scan them wasn't good. The other way would actually be to print out the barcode so that you could scan those using the guns. However, I think probably the physical inventory concept using a scanner is probably better addressed by the WISES folks, and we could get some additional information on that for you if you like.
Great. Another question that came in during the presentation, this individual they have individual parts, and then they also have those parts that are grouped together as a part of a kit. Question on what the best way to count those. Would it be to count those as the individual parts, to count them as the kit, or to count both?
Well, kitted items are normally non-stock, so it's actually not a kit until you go and put the kit together. If you actually make the kits up, you're going to want to make those stocked items, and you can actually go in and do that count. So you really need to decide whether or not you want to be able to inventory those kits. The original idea of a kit, I think, is that I'm going to build it as I go. It's like, for instance, if I were I was working for Craftsman, or a place that sold Craftsman tools. My kit is going to be a full toolbox. So part of it would be the toolbox, part of it would be the hex wrenches, part of it would be the screwdrivers, part of it would be the pliers, part of it would be the vice grips, and part of it would be miscellaneous stuff. Now I don't build those ahead of time. That would be my kit. Okay, so at any time I wanted to ship one of those out, I would go out and pull all that stuff together. If I'm a plumbing supply house, and my wife just had to do this, we just had to replace the filters in our refrigerator and some of the wiring. So they don't sell those things individually, they sell them as a kit, but they're all individually packaged. Do we want to make sure that do we want to make the kits ahead of time, or do we simply want to create those kits on the fly? If you want to have them in inventory, that's what you're going to need to do. You're going to need to count those. You'll need to make the decision as to how you want to store it and then how you want to count it.
John, we have an individual relatively new to Macola, and his question is, are all the reports and the screens that we showed during the presentation, Are those under the BOM and IM tab, or are they under inventory counts?
Well, here's the deal. You start out with all depending on what application you're using. If you're using Macola, BOM and IM, then there's an inventory count section, and that section actually allows you to select a physical count, a cycle count, and all the different processes under that portion. Then the reports themselves are shown under two places. First of all, you have an inventory section, and then you have a BOM section. So you select the inventory section, and you take a look at inventory counts. When you pull up inventory counts, then you're going to see the number of different reports that are available to you. In progression, it's a little bit different. You're going to go to reports, and you're going to select inventory counts, which is a category all by itself, and then you're going to find all of the reports that you can generate in progression. But the reports all live under the inventory control, or inventory counts rather, under the BOM and IM tab.
Thanks, John. At this point, I'm going to unmute everyone's phones in case there's somebody who has a question to ask directly. Again, I just ask if you don't have a question, please self-mute your phone so we don't get overwhelmed by background noise. So at this point, we should have open communication for everybody. So if there are any questions, now would be the time.
Greg, I do want to point out one thing. As important as the functionality of the software is concerned, and I hope this came across, the most important part is organizing your account, because truly, with that much value as far as your profitability is concerned, you really need to make sure that, like I said, this is a project, and the focus and organization for that account is at least as important as how the software handles the account.
Perfect. All righty, well, it doesn't sound like we have any additional questions from the peanut gallery. So I would just like to then thank everyone for taking the time today. We managed to keep this pretty much right at an hour with the Q&A. Keep in mind that this was the first of our training webinars. We do have another one next week on year-end close procedures that will be conducted by Charmaine Schaefer. So if anyone has not already received an invite to that and you are interested, shoot us an email at the email on the screen there, info@ativoconsulting.com, and I will make sure that I get you that invite directly. Without that said, everyone have a great afternoon, and we will be in touch.
Will I give him money? I thought it was a fly attack. I was like, all I got is credit before I roll under it. I was like, wait,